Never let it be said that the old atheist codger does not value the input of his subscribers and respond appropriately. If you enjoy this video, you, like me, have subscriber Ernst Kerstner to thank for it. This is certainly not out of character for me. My entire Beethoven Quartet series was a response to a kind suggestion by my longtime friend Noel. And within a couple of weeks, you'll also see a triple concerto by Antonio Salieri dealt with in my concerto series at the request of my even longer-term friend James. Please do keep the requests coming. I'm grateful for the guidance and especially happy to take up music that I don't know particularly well or have never even encountered. Now, an overview of today's fare. The B minor quintet for clarinet and strings, written by Johannes Brahms in 1891 and published as his Opus 115. By the time he wrote this quintet, Brahms was enjoying his retirement from composition. It was at a performance of one of Weber's clarinet concertos that the composer heard the playing of Richard Mühlfeld and was so impressed that he took up his pen once again to write not only the beautiful work at hand, but also a pair of sonatas for clarinet and piano. The publisher brought out viola transpositions for the clarinet parts in the case of all three works in hopes of appealing to a larger market. At the time of its composition, Brahms's Clarinet Quintet was one of only a handful of such works, and it is modeled closely on the parallel A major quintet by Amadeus Mozart, written for clarinetist Anton Stadler a little over 100 years earlier. Like that earlier work, this one hews to the four-movement symphonic cycle typical of string quartets, and its final movement, like Mozart's, is a variations movement. In brief, the plan is this. A large-scale sonata-form movement in B minor opens the work and is followed by an ABA form slow movement in the parallel major key, a kind of scherzo movement in D major, and the aforementioned variations movement, again in the work's tonic key. A notable feature of the work is a studied ambiguity between the keys of D major and B minor. This ambiguity is so ubiquitous that I find myself tempted to see something autobiographical in it. The word that comes to mind is bittersweet. Isn't that an apt descriptor for life itself? Just a quick word about reading the score. Brahms calls for a clarinet in A, which is essentially a tube a step and a half too long. That player's music is accordingly transposed a minor third higher than it actually sounds. This can constitute an aggravation if you're not used to reading it, but with practice it does become easier to reconcile what your eyes see and what your ears hear. This beautiful performance is by Sharon Kam and the Jerusalem Quartet, available on the Harmonia Mundi label. I'll furnish a link in the description below. Movement 1 opens with music that seems equally at home in D major and B minor. The strings give the first statement of what I have called theme 1A, and the clarinet, entering with a D major arpeggio in measure 5, provides an expansive response that finally ends on a half cadence. In other words, theme 1A, so-called, is actually introductory to what I have identified as theme 1B. This function will be reinforced in two ways as the movement unfolds. The second theme area, set in the relative major, exhibits something like ABA form construction, and its final two measures, which I have identified as a closing functioning as a bridge, is a D major restatement of the movement's first two measures, leading naturally to an exposition repeat already in progress. This is probably the suavest example of musical joinery I know. I should mention in passing that Brahms was probably the most polyphonic of the late 19th century composers, and his thematic material abounds in motivic inversions and retrogrades and is plentifully supplied with canons, especially between the clarinet and first violin. The development is in 5 large sections, and the fourth, the longest of those sections, based on transitional material and marked quasi-sostenuto, begins with a gorgeous modal shift from C-sharp minor to D-flat major and falls twice into flat submediate related keys. These are deeply affecting relations, and if you're open to them, they'll really take your breath away. The recapitulation brings back only the first two measures of theme 1A, and the true main theme begins forthwith. This time, the transition is worked out polyphonically and at greater length, a sort of second development section like those often found in the music of Haydn and Beethoven. A much fuller treatment of theme 1A, now functioning as coda ultima, closes this autumnal-sounding movement in B minor. Movement 2 is set in the parallel major, with its Hungarian-tinted B section reverting to the work's tonic modality. Section A is a sweet B major song following the plan A-A-B-A with a brief harmonic digression in which quadruple meter is superimposed on the prevailing 3/4 time, a technique known as hemiola, setting up a reworked version of the movement's main theme. The entire section is underlain with a rhythmic argument at the beat division level, which supplies a restless undercurrent to this otherwise exceedingly serene music. A simple modal shift inaugurates the B section, which begins with an extended introduction. The Hungarian flavor of this music was doubtless a tribute to the composer's friend Joseph Joachim, who played the first violin part at the work's premiere, and who had collaborated with the composer for several decades. Other major works of Brahms are also associated with Joachim, including his violin concerto. The B section is couched in the AAB pattern known as bar form, a song form associated with the 13th century Meistersingers. A bridging passage brings the return of the B major A section, whose onset is yet another fine example of Brahms's acute sense of musical joinery. No finer musical craftsman ever lived. The tender coda, which seems to be tinged with regret, consists of a distant, domesticated remembrance of the B section's turbulent B minor music. The third movement, the shortest of the four, serves as the work's apparent scherzo, although its construction is unlike that of any other scherzo movement I know. In overall terms, it can be understood as another ABA form movement. Its A section, a rather sunny-sounding outpouring of lyricism that reminds me very much of the second movement of the same composer's Third Symphony. The B section, set in the work's primary key and exhibiting the same kind of tonal ambiguity that we heard in Movement 1, is a complete sonata form movement, exhibiting the structural and tonal relations that we expect of that form. A partial return of the A section completes the brightest movement of this masterpiece. The use of variations form for his final movement is Brahms's nod to Mozart, who chose the same form for the finale of his own Clarinet Quintet. The music returns to B minor, and the theme exhibits the kind of two-strain construction that we're used to seeing in movements of this type, although the repeat of the first strain is written out to accommodate a different harmonic path. All of the variations follow the same structural pattern, with the fourth variation set in the parallel major and the waltz-like fifth moving at a different pace in a different meter. Most magically of all, Brahms brings back the coda of the opening movement somewhat revised to provide a wistful B minor conclusion to the whole work. Then again, wistful isn't the only adjective that comes to my mind. Does anyone else notice a close parallel to the ending of the Mahler Sixth?